The Aleani Emperor's claws punctured the screaming human boy's arms, ignoring his shrieks as the reptilian ruler dangled him over a vat of bubbling acid, but he would soon learn not to fuck with humanity's children. Ralph Sullivan's fists clenched white as he watched the Aleani Emperor Pollux appear on his quarters viewscreen. The ex-Marine asteroid miner's blood boiled while Pollux dismissed his unfathomable cruelty as a tragic accident. The galactic reporter's voice sounded hollow, relaying that no species dared to openly challenge the Aleani's ruthless tyranny after their latest atrocity. Ralph's jaw set as Pollux warned any human retaliation against murdering a child diplomat would meet the full force of the Aleani's undefeated war machine. The miner released a slow breath, remembering his son, killed under Aleani bombs dropped on a human school years ago. He walked to a footlocker and yanked out an old pulse rifle and dusty marine uniform. Ralph would show Pollux what it meant to start a war with mankind. The Aleani wanted to brutalize human children and expected to get away with it. They had no idea what was coming for them. Ralph strode into the seedy dive near the spaceport, his battle-scarred powered armor sheathing his muscled frame. The ex-Marine's eyes scanned the dimly lit bar, ignoring the riffraff of mercs and rogues clustered around tables. Ralph zeroed in on an Aleani Legion commander, arm-wrestling a cyborg, the pair hunched over a pile of credit chips. He marched over. Ralph slammed an armored fist on the table, sending the credits flying. The hulking Aleani whipped his head around, hissing in irritation. "Clathgar, you scaly bastard," Ralph growled. "Still selling your claws to the highest bidder?" The reptilian alien shoved the cyborg aside, uncoiling to his full 7-foot height. He glared down at Ralph, slitted eyes gleaming. "Sullivan," Clathgar rasped, his English tinged with a sibilant accent. "I thought you were retired. Come to collect on that drink I owe you." Ralph stepped in close, his voice low and furious. "I'm calling in that favor. Pollux killed a human child. He's going to pay, and you're going to help me make him." Clathgar's eyes widened a fraction. His forked tongue flicked out, tasting the human's rage on the air. "You want to take on the Emperor? Just us?" Ralph shook his head. "Not just us. We're going to get the band back together. Everyone from Zeta Company that's still breathing. I know most of them are hurting for credits and itching for payback." Clathgar considered, running a clawed hand over his snout. Old scars crisscrossed the leathery hide. The Aleani gave a decisive nod. "Pollux has gone too far this time. There are others among my kind who feel the same. This may be the chance we've been waiting for. I will rally those I can trust." Ralph clasped forearms with his one-time foe, sealing the pact. "Give me 2 standard cycles to round up who I can. Then we hit the Aleani so hard they'll be crapping their own scales." The unlikely allies parted ways, each bound for a different section of the station. They had preparations to make, weapons to acquire, old comrades to track down, attack plans to draft. The first pieces were in motion. Decades of resentment, of chafing under the Aleani yoke were about to explode. The Emperor's cruelty had sown the seeds. Now it was time to reap the whirlwind. Ralph's freighter shuddered as it docked at the derelict mining station, the ancient mechanisms groaning in protest. He stepped out into the cavernous main hangar, the air thick with dust and the tang of rust. But there was something else too, anticipation, energy, the crackle of a gathering storm. A dozen ships were already scattered about, each bearing the scars of hard-fought campaigns. Their crews were gathered in knots, checking weapons and swapping stories of past battles. As Ralph strode further in, they began to take notice, straightening up and nudging each other. "I'll be damned," a gravelly voice called out. "The man himself!" Ralph grinned fiercely as he recognized Gus, the burly mechanic. His cybernetic arms whirred as he pushed through the crowd. "You really got them all to come," Ralph said, clasping Gus's metal hand. "Damn right I did," Gus said. "You think we'd miss a chance to give Pollux some payback?" Ralph looked past Gus to the assembled veterans of Zeta Company. There was Lena, her lithe frame belying the deadliness of the laser rifle she carried, Hero, the former medic, his prosthetic hand gleaming. Dozens more emerged from the shadows, each bearing the marks of wars past but all standing tall, ready. Heavy footsteps announced Clathgar's arrival. The Eleani rebel had been busy too. He was flanked by a full 24 of his kind, each a towering reptilian bristling with weapons and armor. One, a scarred female with a cybernetic eye, stepped forward. "I am Sahara," she said, her voice a rasping hiss. "Commander of the Shadow Fangs. Pollux's actions have disgraced our warrior code. We are ready to strike at the heart of his empire." "You all know why we're here," he said, his voice ringing through the hangar. "Pollux and his kind have gone unchecked for too long. It's time we bring the fight to them." He tapped a command into his wrist unit, bringing up a holographic display. It showed a massive orbital structure, bristling with ships and defenses. "Intel says Pollux will be touring this shipyard in 3 cycles. That's where we hit them. We go in hard and fast with everything we've got. We make them bleed." A roar of approval went up from the crowd, a primal sound of fury and hunger. Weapons were thrust into the air, oaths sworn in a dozen languages. Ralph held up a hand for silence. He met the eyes of each warrior in turn, seeing his own determination reflected back. "I won't lie to you," he said quietly. "This is a one-way trip for most of us, but if we succeed, we'll go down in history as the ones who finally brought the Eleani to their knees." As one, the assembled soldiers slammed fists to chests in a thunderous salute. The sound echoed through the hangar like the tolling of a bell. The die was cast, the plan set in motion. There could be no turning back now. The klaxons howled, urgent and piercing, as Ralph crouched in the shadow of the dreadnought's landing strut, pulse rifle locked and loaded. Clathgar hunkered beside him, reptilian eyes fixed on the sky, clawed grip tight on his plasma blaster. "Pollux's shuttle," Clathgar hissed, "right on schedule." The sleek black craft descended, escorted by a phalanx of deadly fighters. It settled onto the landing pad with a hydraulic hiss, ramp lowering. A line of elite guards marched out, encasing the Emperor in a living shield of armored scales and bristling weapons. Ralph's finger tightened on the trigger, hatred searing his veins as Pollux emerged, resplendent in ornate battle armor, his regalia glinting in the harsh shipyard light. The Emperor strode forward, head high, to greet the base commander with imperious disdain. Lena's sniper rifle cracked, a guard's head snapping back in a spray of gore. More shots rang out, her squad raining precision death from the skeletal frames above. Gus's explosives detonated in a chain of blinding flashes, gouts of flame and shrapnel ripping through the shipyard's critical systems. Clathgar roared, the primal battle cry of an apex predator, and charged, his warriors surging forward beside him. They laid down a withering hail of plasma fire, scattering the Eleani line. Ralph was a step behind, rifle bucking as he cut down scaly foes left and right, spent power cells pinging off his armor. Sahara's commandos struck from within, the shipyard's defenses suddenly faltering, blast doors slamming shut to trap the enemy, frantic comm chatter filling the air as they sowed chaos. Heroes' medics swept in low, their shuttle skimming the deck, braving the deadly crossfire to winch the wounded aboard. Pollux's guards closed ranks around their lord, ushering him back towards the shuttle's illusory safety, but Ralph and Clathgar pressed forward, unstoppable, rebel Eleani rallying to their side. Smoke clogged the air, the stench of burning plastic and charred flesh, the artificial sky obscured by billowing flames. The cacophony of battle swelled, the roar of weapons punctuated by screams and the crunch of bone. And at the heart of the maelstrom, Emperor and rebel locked eyes, a confrontation decades in the making, the reckoning at hand as Ralph charged towards his hated foe. A monumental explosion ripped through the shipyard, the shockwave slamming into Ralph like a Mack truck. His boots left the deck as he flew backwards, crashing hard on his back. His helmet cracked against the unyielding metal, stars bursting across his vision. Clathgar's clawed hand seized Ralph's armored collar, wrenching him upright. The Eleani rebel's jaws gaped wide, roaring something lost in the cacophony of battle. Ralph shook his head, trying to clear the ringing in his ears. A quarter of the shipyard was engulfed in roiling flames, the heat scorching even through his armored suit. They forged ahead, the blistering temperatures no match for their relentless advance. Ahead, Pollux' Imperial Guard had closed ranks, a wall of scales and steel bristling with high-powered weapons. Ralph and Clathgar locked eyes, a split-second non-verbal exchange. As one, they plunged directly into the onslaught. Pulse rifle blazing, Ralph zigzagged through the deadly hailstorm, Eliani blaster bolts sizzling past his head. Beside him, Clathgar stormed forward, talons flashing as he raked an opponent across the face. A bolt struck the rebel square in the shoulder, scales shattering. But Clathgar barely flinched, his regenerative biology already knitting muscle and sinew. Ralph felt a searing lance of pain as a shot grazed his ribs, the acrid stench of burning flesh filling his nostrils. He snarled through gritted teeth, raw fury propelling him onward. They were almost upon the Emperor when an imposing figure blocked their path. A mammoth Eliani guardsman girded in intricate armor, an energy glaive crackling in his grip. The Titan roared a challenge, then lunged at Ralph with staggering speed. Ralph barely brought his rifle up in time, the glaive's downward slash slamming against the barrel in a shower of sparks. They clashed in a whirlwind dance of death, the guardsman's glaive slicing the air, Ralph's rifle thundering with point-blank shots. Clathgar grappled with another guard, a hurricane of slashing claws and stabbing blades. Ralph's rifle ran dry with a click. The guardsman charged with a victorious bellow, glaive aimed straight for Ralph's heart. Ralph pivoted at the last instant, the glaive hissing under his arm. He seized the haft, wrenching the Eliani off balance, then rammed an armored knee into his opponent's scaly jaw. Bone crunched sickeningly, the guard went slack. Letting the body drop, Ralph snatched up the fallen glaive. He spun to see Clathgar rip his foe's throat open in a spray of dark blood. The rebel line had shattered. Pollux stood alone ahead, regal armor reflecting the inferno's hellish glow. The tyrant turned to face them, drawing an ornate energy blade, a sneer of disdain twisting his features. Ralph and Clathgar advanced, weapons at the ready, prepared to end this once and for all. Ralph and Clathgar circled the Emperor, their boots crunching on the rubble-strewn deck. Pollux loomed before them, a towering figure encased in intricate armor, his energy blade crackling with lethal power. The Eliani ruler's eyes glittered with malice, his stance poised and predatory. Pollux struck first, lunging at Ralph with blinding speed. His blade sliced the air, a blurred arc of sizzling energy. Ralph parried desperately, the shock of impact ringing up his arms, rattling his teeth. Clathgar seized the opening, pouncing at Pollux's back, his claw blades shrieking against the ornate armor. Pollux spun, a whirlwind of deadly grace, his blade hissing through the space Clathgar's head had occupied an instant before. Ralph pressed the attack, his glaive clashing against Pollux's in a dazzling cascade of sparks. The air crackled with the fury of their exchange, ringing with the discordant song of energy against energy. They traded blows in a deadly dance, Pollux's blade flashing, Ralph's glaive thrumming. The Emperor was fast, inhumanly so, his every move a blur. Ralph strained to counter each strike, muscles burning, breath ragged in his throat. Clathgar harried Pollux from the sides, claws raking and slashing, seeking a chink in the ruler's impeccable defense. Suddenly Pollux's blade slipped past Ralph's guard. It sliced into his side, parting armor and flesh. Searing agony burst through him and he stumbled back, one hand clamped to the wound, hot blood seeping between his fingers. Pollux advanced, his lipless mouth peeled back in a vicious grin. "Did you truly believe you could defy me, human?" he sneered. "Your head will adorn my trophy wall, beside that mewling child's." Rage coursed through Ralph, searing hotter than the pain. He met Clathgar's eyes over Pollux's shoulder, saw the same cold fury reflected there. He turned back to Pollux, his own lips curving in a grim smile. Ralph charged, glaive raised high. Pollux braced to meet him. But at the last instant Ralph dropped into a slide, glaive lashing out in a scything arc. It caught Pollux behind the knees. The Emperor staggered, balance lost for one crucial heartbeat. Clathgar landed on his back like a ton of bricks. talons punching through the gap at the nape of Pollux's neck, the weak point in his ornate armor. Pollux went rigid, a choked gasp escaping his throat. Then he toppled, a puppet with strings cut, dark blood pooling beneath his still form. Ralph stood over him, chest heaving, glaive raised to strike a final blow, but it never fell. Around them, the battle was dying down as word of Pollux's fall spread. Eliani rebels threw down their arms, some even turning on their former comrades. Ralph looked up as Lena emerged from the swirling smoke, her snipers in tow. Gus limped up, cradling a wounded arm, his demo experts trailing behind. In the distance, Ralph heard the roar of dropship engines. The human reinforcements had arrived, too late for the fight, but just in time for the cleanup. He met Clathgar's eyes, saw the same exhaustion and grim triumph reflected there. They had won the day, but the war was far from over. More battles loomed ahead, more tyrants to topple. But for now they would savor this victory, for the child, for all of Pollux's victims, for the promise of freedom's dawn. The roar of dropship engines filled the ravaged shipyard as human reinforcements poured from the bellies of the craft. Squads of heavily armed soldiers fanned out, securing the perimeter and rounding up surrendering Eliani. Ralph stood over Pollux's body, the Emperor's ornate armor now tarnished with scorch marks and the dark stain of his blood. Clathgar limped up beside him, one clawed hand clutching a wound in his side. "Lieutenant Sullivan," a voice barked. Ralph turned to see a stern-faced human admiral striding towards them, flanked by a squad of elite guards. The admiral's eyes swept over the scene of destruction, lingering on the fallen emperor. "You have a lot to answer for," the admiral said grimly. Ralph drew himself up, ignoring the throb of his own injuries. "With respect, sir, I did what needed to be done. Pollux's reign of terror is over." The admiral's expression remained stony. "That wasn't your call to make, Lieutenant. You've ignited a powder keg here. The Eliani Empire is in chaos, and we're not ready for a full-scale war." Clathgar stepped forward, his clawed hands open in a placating gesture. "Admiral, the Eliani people are ready for change. Pollux's cruelty was not the way of our ancestors. With the right leaders, we can forge a new path." The admiral looked unconvinced, but before he could retort, a commotion drew their attention. A group of Eliani rebels dragged a disheveled figure before them, the base commander, his once pristine uniform torn and scorched. "Admiral," the commander rasped, "I have vital intelligence. Pollux was building a superweapon, a doomsday device capable of destroying entire star systems. It's hidden in a secret base, and it's nearly complete." The admiral's eyes widened. He turned to Ralph and Clathgar, his expression grave. "It seems your actions may have been more timely than I realized. If this weapon is as powerful as he says, it could shift the balance of power in the galaxy." Ralph nodded, his jaw tight. "Then we need to find it and destroy it before someone else picks up where Pollux left off." The admiral hesitated, then gave a curt nod. "Agreed, Lieutenant. Assemble a strike team. You'll have all the resources you need. But understand this, you're operating under my authority now. No more rogue missions." Ralph snapped a salute. "Yes, sir." As the admiral strode away to coordinate the fleet's response, Ralph turned to Clathgar. The Eliani rebel bared his fangs in a fierce grin. "You heard the man," Ralph said. "Let's get the team together. We've got a superweapon to find." Ralph felt a matching grin tug at his lips, despite the gravity of the situation. Let's just hope these old bones can keep up. Together, they set off across the battle-scarred shipyard to gather their comrades. The Emperor may be dead and the yard secure, but Ralph knew their mission was far from over. If the commander's intel was right, an even greater threat loomed on the horizon, and it would fall to Ralph and his misfit band of warriors to face it head-on. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and failure was not an option. The stealth ship rocketed through hyperspace, its sleek black hull barely visible against the star-streaked void. Inside, Ralph Sullivan stood before a holographic display, the ghostly blue light casting his battle-scarred features in sharp relief. His team gathered around him, a motley crew of humans and Eliani united by a shared purpose. "All right, listen up," Ralph said, his voice gruff. "We're approaching Pollux's secret base. It's hidden deep in an asteroid field, but thanks to our new friend—" He nodded towards the base commander, who stood off to the side, his scaly features tight with tension. "We've got the schematics and security codes." He tapped the display, zooming in on the base's layout. "Lena, you and your snipers will take up positions here and here, providing overwatch." Lena, a whip-thin woman with a laser rifle slung across her back, nodded sharply. "Gus, your demo experts will rig the reactor core to blow. Once it goes, this whole base is space dust." Gus, a burly man with cybernetic eyes, grinned savagely. "Clathgar, you and your Eliani will secure the hangar bay, prevent any ships from escaping. We can't let word get out before we're ready." Clathgar hissed in agreement, his claws flexing. "The rest of you are with me," Ralph continued. "We'll push through to the control room and secure the superweapon. Intel suggests it's some kind of amplifier, designed to boost Eliani's psychic abilities to devastating levels. In the wrong hands, it could be catastrophic." The team nodded grimly, hands tightening on weapons, armor creaking as they shifted. Suddenly alarms blared throughout the ship, red lights flashing. "Captain," the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, tight with tension, "we've been detected. They've launched fighters." Ralph cursed under his breath. "Change of plans. Lena, Gus, you're on fighter duty. Keep those ships off our backs, the rest of you with me. We're going in now." The ship shuddered as plasma bolts slammed into its shields, the pilot weaving desperately through the asteroid field. The base loomed ahead, its hangar bay doors yawning open like the maw of some great beast. "Brace for impact," Ralph yelled, gripping his harness. The ship slammed into the hangar bay, metal screeching, sparks flying. Before it had even stopped moving, Ralph was out of his seat, pulse rifle in hand. "Go, Ghost, go," he roared, and the team was moving, pouring out of the ship like vengeful ghosts. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air as Eliani soldiers opened fire. Ralph and his team dove for cover, returning fire. Clathgar and his Eliani peeled off, charging into their former comrades with a roar. Claws flashed, blades sang, and blood spattered the deck. Ralph led the charge towards the control room, blasting through bulkheads and barricades. Eliani soldiers poured in from all sides, the air thick with the stench of ozone and charred flesh. Hero, the team's medic, went down with a scream, a plasma bolt burning through his chest. Ralph gritted his teeth and pushed forward, determined to make the sacrifice count. They breached the control room in a hail of fire, pulse rifles and plasma bolts filling the air. The Eliani scientists threw up their hands, surrendering. And there, in the center of the room, was the superweapon, a pulsing orb of energy suspended in a web of crackling lightning. The scientist complied, clawed hands shaking as he typed in the deactivation codes. The orb dimmed, the energy dissipating. Ralph breathed a sigh of relief, but before he could secure the device, a thunderous explosion rocked the base. "Ralph," Gus's voice crackled over the comms, tight with urgency. "We've got a problem. That blast came from the reactor core. Someone's activated the self-destruct sequence. We've got minutes at best." Ralph's blood ran cold. They'd been betrayed. He looked at the scientist, saw the triumphant gleam in his reptilian eyes. "You'll never leave here alive," the scientist hissed. "Pollux's legacy will endure." Ralph didn't hesitate. He raised his rifle and fired, the scientist's head snapping back in a spray of gore. "Clathgar, Lena, Gus, everyone, fall back to the ship now," he yelled into the comms. "We're out of time." He grabbed the super weapon, tucking it under his arm like a deadly football. Then he was running, his team falling in behind him, racing against the clock as the base shuddered and shook around them. They piled into the ship, Gus at the controls. "Punch it!" Ralph yelled, and the ship blasted out of the hangar just as a series of explosions ripped through the base. They streaked away into the void, the base collapsing in on itself behind them, a miniature supernova in the heart of the asteroid field. Ralph slumped into a seat, the superweapon secure in his lap. They'd done it, but as he looked around at the battered, bloodied faces of his team, he knew the cost had been high. The space around the human base teemed with activity, as dropships ferried Ralph's battered team to the waiting medical frigates. In the command center, Ralph stood stiffly at attention, his armor still scorched and dented, as the Admiral paced before a holographic display of the galaxy. "Lieutenant Sullivan," the Admiral said, turning to face him, "your team has accomplished the impossible. Pollux is dead, and his superweapon is in our hands." Ralph nodded, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. Behind the Admiral he could see the weapon itself, suspended in a containment field, a swarm of scientists and engineers already buzzing around it. "But we have a new problem," the Admiral continued, his brow furrowed. "With Pollux gone, the Eliani Empire is in chaos. Our intel suggests that several factions are already moving to fill the power vacuum, including some of Pollux's most ruthless lieutenants." Ralph's fists clenched at his sides. "We can't let that happen, sir. If someone like Pollux takes control again—" "We'll be right back where we started," the Admiral finished grimly. "That's why we're launching Operation Kingmaker. We're going to back our own candidate, someone who can lead the Eliani in a new direction." The Admiral gestured, and Clathgar stepped forward from the shadows. Ralph's eyebrows shot up. "Him?" Clathgar inclined his head. "I have the support of many of the rebel factions. With humanity's backing, I believe I can unite my people." Ralph frowned, considering. "It won't be easy. Pollux's loyalists won't just roll over." "Exactly why we need you, Lieutenant," the Admiral said. "You and your team will be Clathgar's bodyguards and advisors. Help him navigate Eliani politics and crush any opposition." The next few weeks passed in a blur of clandestine meetings and firefights. Ralph and his team shadowed Clathgar as he met with rebel leaders in dimly lit back rooms and aboard unmarked ships, always watching for the glint of an assassin's blade or the telltale shimmer of a cloaked Eliani warship. They hit loyalist weapons caches and supply depots, cutting off the flow of arms and equipment. In the meantime, human diplomats worked tirelessly behind the scenes, using the captured superweapon as leverage to sway key Eliani factions to Clathgar's side. It all led to this moment, in the heart of the Eliani capital, as Clathgar prepared to address the High Council and stake his claim to leadership. Ralph and his team flanked the rebel leader as they marched into the council chambers, weapons at the ready. They were halfway to the central podium when all hell broke loose. Loyalist soldiers burst through the doors, plasma bolts sizzling through the air. Ralph and his team closed ranks around Clathgar, returning fire. It was a brutal, close-quarters battle, the kind Ralph had seen too many of. They pushed forward inch by blood-soaked inch, leaving a trail of Eliani corpses in their wake. Just as they reached the podium, a massive explosion rocked the building, showering them with rubble. Heavy artillery, Ralph realized with a sinking feeling. They couldn't hold out much longer. "Get Clathgar inside," he roared at his team over the din of battle. "I'll hold them off." He turned to face the oncoming horde, his rifle spitting death. Loyalists fell before him, but for everyone he cut down, 2 more seemed to take their place. Ralph's rifle clicked empty. He reached for another power cell, but his hand came up empty. This was it then. He braced himself for the end. Suddenly the doors to the council chambers burst open. Clathgar strode out, the members of the High Council at his back. "Enough!" his voice boomed, amplified by the chamber's sound system. "The council has made its decision. I am the new leader of the Eliani Empire." The loyalists hesitated, looking uncertain. Ralph seized the moment, rallying his team for one final push. Caught between the rebel forces and the council guards, the loyalists quickly surrendered. In the sudden silence, Ralph stumbled over to Clathgar. The rebel leader clasped his arm. "Congratulations," Ralph said. "Emperor Clathgar." Clathgar grinned fiercely. "I couldn't have done it without you, my friend. Humanity has proven itself a true ally this day." Ralph nodded, too drained to speak. They had won a great victory, not just for humanity, but for the future of the galaxy itself. But as he looked out over the war-ravaged capital, smoke still rising from shattered buildings, he knew their work was far from over. Forging a lasting peace would be the greatest challenge yet. In the aftermath of their triumph, Ralph and his team threw themselves into the hard work of rebuilding and unifying the fractured Eliani Empire. They spent long days in tense negotiations, brokering truces between rival factions, and longer nights poring over intelligence reports, rooting out pockets of Pollux loyalists. Clathgar proved to be a capable and charismatic leader, his clawed hands steady on the reins of power. Under his guidance, and with the tireless efforts of Ralph and his team, the Eliani slowly began to come together. Rebel leaders laid down their arms and took up seats in Clathgar's council. Trade routes reopened. The scars of war began to heal. But even as a fragile peace settled over the empire, Ralph couldn't shake a sense of unease. Reports began to filter in of a growing insurgency, whispers of a warlord named Zekrath rallying Pollux's most fanatical followers to his banner. Ralph brought his concerns to Clathgar, but the new emperor brushed them aside. Zekrath is a minor nuisance, he insisted. Our focus must be on rebuilding, not chasing shadows. Ralph wasn't convinced, but he trusted Clathgar's judgment. He redoubled his efforts to strengthen the empire, working his team to exhaustion. And then on a day that dawned like any other, the shadows struck. The first explosions rocked the capital before the sun had fully risen. Ralph jolted awake to the sound of screams and shattering glass, the acrid tang of smoke filling his nostrils. He was armored and armed in seconds, charging into the chaos. The streets were a war zone. Eliani soldiers in the livery of Zekrath's insurgency rampaged through the city, plasma rifles blazing. Civilians ran for cover, only to be cut down by indiscriminate fire. Ralph rallied his team and fought his way to the Imperial Palace, carving a path through the enemy with grim efficiency. But when they burst into the throne room, Clathgar was nowhere to be found. A hologram flickered to life in the center of the room. It was Zekrath, his scales battle-scarred, his eyes burning with fanatical rage. "Your false emperor has fled like the coward he is," he sneered. "And now the true sons of the Eliani will take back what is ours." The hologram panned to show a pulsing orb suspended in a crackling field of energy, the superweapon, stolen from the human base. "Did you really think you could keep this power from us?" Zekrath taunted. "With this we will crush your pathetic alliance and restore the Eliani to their rightful place as masters of the galaxy." The hologram winked out, and Ralph slammed a fist into the wall, cracking the stone. They had to get the superweapon back and fast. But first, they had to find Clathgar and get him to safety. Ralph opened a comm channel to the human fleet in orbit. "This is Lieutenant Sullivan," he barked. "The capital is under attack. We need immediate reinforcements and extraction for Emperor Clathgar." The response was terse. "Negative, Lieutenant. The insurgents have a ship-mounted railgun aimed at the palace. Any attempt to land will be suicide. You're on your own." Ralph cursed and switched channels. "Clathgar, come in. Where are you?" A burst of static. Then Clathgar's voice, strained but alive. "I'm in the tunnels beneath the palace. Zekrath's forces are hunting for me. I can't hold out for long." Ralph made a snap decision. "Stay where you are. We'll come to you and hold them off long enough for reinforcements to arrive." Clathgar started to protest, but Ralph cut him off. "There's no time to argue. This is the only way." He turned to his team, seeing his own resolve reflected in their eyes. They all knew what had to be done. As they raced through the battle-torn streets, a plan began to form in Ralph's mind. A desperate gamble, but the only one they had left. He would take a small team and draw Zekrath's forces away from the palace, buying time for Clathgar to escape. They would fight their way into the heart of the insurgency, find the superweapon, and destroy it, no matter the cost. It was a suicide mission, and they all knew it. But they were Zeta Company. They had faced impossible odds before and come out standing. They would do it again, or die trying. As they neared the tunnel entrance, Ralph looked at each of his comrades in turn. Lena, Gus, Sahara, each ready to lay down their lives for the mission. Then they plunged into the darkness, weapons ready, hearts steeled for the fight of their lives. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, Please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.